The problem today is not simply that we have bad representatives. The problem is that we have representatives in the first place. This notion that we should elect representatives and then they should make laws that we have to obey because we elected them and they represent us is a bad idea. It's a bad idea that upper class people like the founding fathers and all of the upper class people that have controlled our country since then in what I think deserves to be called a fake democracy, a dictatorship of the rich. It's a bad idea that they love and that we should reject. Now, the reason they love this bad idea of that they call representative democracy is because the flip side of the coin of if you buy this notion of representative democracy is that we're obliged to obey these representatives. These representatives write laws, a relatively small number of them sitting in some capital city that's typically far away from most people, and yet hundreds of millions of us, according to this representative democracy notion, have to obey the laws that that handful of people write? Is the upper class crazy to think that we're going to fall for this? Well, we have been falling for it. That's the problem. You see, when you have representatives with that power, and that's basically a dictatorship of, a few hundred people over hundreds of millions of people, it's very easy for an upper class, an oppressive, exploiting class of people to control the hundreds of millions of people by just getting influence and power and control over a few hundred individuals, which is not hard to do if you're an upper class with lots of money. You can bribe those people. You can offer them cushy jobs if they vote the right way when their term expires, and there's 1,000 different ways that the billionaire plutocracy today influences the politicians. Everybody knows it, and the lobbying that is sort of officially allowed is just the tip of the iceberg. And so, from the point of view of an upper class that wants to control and dominate and oppress hundreds of millions of people, what more could they ask for than to have those hundreds of millions of people believe that they are obliged to obey laws written by this tiny couple hundred people, typically hundreds or thousands of miles away in a capital city like Washington, D.C., or even the state capital, same thing applies. It's a recipe for disaster for ordinary people like us, but it's a perfect solution for the upper class to control us and to get away with it because they can say, well, hey, you elected these people, right? They represent you. You got to obey them. Okay, well, what's the alternative to this representative democracy scam? The alternative in an egalitarian society is what I call genuine democracy. It's voluntary federation of local assemblies of egalitarians in a local community the size of a zip code, more or less. The local assembly of egalitarians is open to all the people in that local community who support the egalitarian values of no rich and no poor equality and mutual aid, helping each other, not pitting people in competition with each other to make them more easily controlled and dominated by a privileged elite. In most communities, the vast majority of people are egalitarians, whether they've ever heard that word or not. They have egalitarian values. And so in most communities, the local assembly would be open to most of the people, well, maybe adults, we're not talking about small children, in that community. And only egalitarians would have the right to participate in the local assembly, and egalitarians would, all of them would have the right to participate as full equals in making decisions of the local assembly. And those decisions are laws and policies that everybody in the local community has to obey. But for an egalitarian in that local community, it means that there's not going to be any law that he or she has to obey that he or she did not have a right to personally partake as an equal with all others in the drafting and writing in the prior discussion of that law. It means that there are no representatives who are writing laws that egalitarians have to obey. It means that every individual egalitarian represents him or herself, period. They have the right to show up and have as much say in the writing of laws and policies that they're going to have to obey as anybody else, and no one has more power. No representative in some far distant city can write a law and say, hey, you've got to obey this no matter what, whether you want to or not, because, hey, I'm your representative. No. In an egalitarian society, egalitarian people represent themselves. And what this means is that in an egalitarian society, we explicitly reject what I call the authoritarian principle. The authoritarian principle says that you have to obey the highest body of government no matter what, whether you want to or not, whether you think the laws it's passing and writing are moral or immoral makes no difference. You have to obey them. Now, the authoritarian principle is usually in the context of it being understood that for some reason the highest level of government has legitimacy. And the legitimacy is based on different things in different times and places. In the United States and a lot of other countries today, central governments base their legitimacy on the idea that they were elected. And that's why people like Jimmy Carter go around giving the good housekeeping seal of approval to elections everywhere to maintain this legitimacy idea for what are essentially going to be the small number of dictators that actually act on behalf of ruling plutocracies, and people are going to be told that they have to obey. But and sometimes in places, the legitimacy of the central government is based on something different than being elected. Sometimes it could be that, like in the Soviet Union, that the Bolshevik Party understood Marxism and Leninism better than ordinary people, so that's why you had to obey them. And a place like Iran, it's a theocracy. The legitimacy is based on the idea that the supreme Ayatollah, whatever his title is closer to God, or at least closer to understanding what God wants people to do, and so forth. So the basis of legitimacy can vary. But whatever it is, the authoritarian principle says that if the government has some basis of legitimacy, then you have to obey the relatively small number of people who constitute the lawmaking body of the highest level of government, no matter what. And the egalitarian principle is no, you don't. That the only laws egalitarians have to obey are the laws that they had a full right as equals with all others to discuss, draft, and write in their own local communities, local assembly. And if we have an egalitarian society, then we will have real democracy in the sense that the vast majority of people with egalitarian values will be able to shape society by their values. They'll be able to make laws and policies that do that, and there will be no higher authority that can tell them, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. Now, how does voluntary federation of egalitarians work on a larger scale? You probably are asking, which is an excellent question. The local assemblies send delegates. I call them delegates, not representatives. They send delegates to meet with the delegates from other local assemblies in what I call a non-local assembly, because it's an assembly of delegates from local assemblies. And the purpose, the task for these delegates when they meet is not to write a law that everybody from the local communities that they come from have to obey. No, it is to craft proposals for cooperation, for joint efforts by the various local communities. And those proposals are then taken back to the local assemblies, and the local assemblies are free to enact the local proposal because they agree with it, or to say, no, we don't agree with it, and we're not going to carry out this local proposal, to make the decision as they wish. And typically, if not enough local assemblies agree to enact, to do what their local community is called upon to do for the larger proposal, if they don't agree to do that, then the proposal cannot be enacted, and it gets discussed further. Negotiations occur between the delegates in the non-local assembly and the various local assemblies, back and forth, until they either come up with a modified proposal that a sufficient number of local assemblies agree with, and the proposal gets enacted, or that fails and the proposal just never gets enacted. But in either case, the people in a local community who are egalitarians are not required to do anything that their local assembly democratically agreed to do. This is what genuine democracy for egalitarians is. And very quickly, I want to just raise the point that you might be thinking, how come only egalitarians can participate, have a right to participate in these local assemblies? And the answer is that democracy is a way for people with shared fundamental values from shaping society by those values and cooperating to do it and reaching compromises on secondary issues that they might disagree with, reaching compromises peacefully with some kind of decision rule like majority vote, or possibly some kind of consensus rule and so forth. That's what democracy is. Democracy is not the way, and cannot possibly be the way, for people with fundamentally conflicting values to cooperate this way and reach compromises peacefully and so forth. And the reason is that if people have fundamentally conflicting values, for example, if some people think there should be chattel slavery and other people don't, there is no way that either group is going to peaceably agree to some compromise with the other just because of some decision rule like a majority vote. Nope. it's going to be settled by force or the credible threat of force. And that's why we had a civil war, even though we had a fully functioning representative democracy, so-called, with representatives in Congress and all that. The reason there was a civil war to resolve the question of chattel slavery is because there was no way in hell that the slave owners were going to agree to free their slaves just because of some majority vote somewhere. No. And anyone who says that there can be a democracy of all the people, when that all the people includes people with fundamentally conflicting values, like should there be chattel slavery or not, or the modern version, should there be class inequality or not, there can never be truly a democracy of all the people, including the ones who think there should be class inequality and the ones who think that there should not be, because that issue will only be resolved by the side that brings to bear the greatest force or the credible threat of force against the other, not by any peaceful decision rule, which is what democracy claims to use to settle all differences of opinion. So the reason we can't have anti-egalitarians in the local assemblies is because they would be trying to shape society by anti-egalitarian values. They'd be trying to create or recreate class inequality. And that's not what the purpose of an egalitarian government is. And so inviting people with the contrary purpose to join your organization would be crazy. It would be like a fire department inviting arsonists to join the fire department. That's crazy. Everyone can understand that when you're trying to accomplish a mission, you don't invite people who are deadly opposed to that mission to join you in figuring out how to accomplish the mission, do you? So that is the answer to that question. Okay, I got articles posted here for you to read about, and I hope you will, and I hope you will subscribe to this YouTube channel. Thank you.